Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It is the top of the hour, and we are going to begin our presentation today with Brother Mohammed Lakhani, who is presenting to us about legal issues in the year of COVID. So let me introduce him to you. Mohammed Lakhani advises school districts, community colleges, and higher education institutions in contracts, compliance, labor, employment, and student matters. He has drafted and negotiated commercial, real estate, and software agreements, council administration on issues relating to procurement, the Open Meetings Act, and the Freedom of Information Act. Mohammed advises on employment matters relating to the American with Disabilities Act, the Family Medical Leave Act, and the Age of Discrimination in Employment Act, and routinely conducts training and internal investigations to help resolve Title IX discrimination, sexual harassment, and misconduct complaints. I am Susan Labadie, board member from CISNA, and I thank you so much for joining us today. And so I will turn it over to you.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for joining on this Saturday early afternoon. This is obviously an interesting time. I wanted to kind of begin by thanking you all for having me on. Hopefully, inshallah, it'll present some good information. I will share my screen and we can get started. All right, can everybody see that? All right.
Yes.
Okay, all right, great. So CISNA obviously is a national organization, but I wanted to kind of first start off by understanding where everybody is coming from. I assume that people are all over the place, but if you even want to put it in the chat as to where you're coming from, just to kind of give me an idea. The only reason I ask that is, each state is obviously very different. When you are in Illinois or California, the school environment is much different than if you're in Alabama or Mississippi. So it kind of gives me a really good context as to where people are coming from and what kind of issues they bring. Oh, great, thank you so much. Before I start, I like to keep my presentations very informal. Feel free to ask questions either in the chat or you can just stop me in the middle. That's totally fine as well. I wanted to talk a little bit more about COVID, but I know Sister Azra, when inviting me, really wanted to just kind of open it up so that general Q&A can kind of happen. I know you guys have a lot of different issues that you guys would like a legal brain to pick. I won't promise that I can answer any of them, but inshallah, I will try my very, very best to at least spot the issues. Also know that I am an Illinois licensed attorney, so I'm not licensed to practice law in other states. Of course, I can kind of give you my gut instinct and all of that kind of good stuff, but to the extent that you need, real proper legal advice, I'd suggest either contacting me and we can work with co-counsel, or really just finding an attorney within your state that can help you with those issues. I also have resources. There are, alhamdulillah, a lot of national networks now of Muslim attorneys that focus on private schools. So if ever you need a resource to get in touch with an attorney in your state and you don't know where to start, I'm happy to be that resource to get that going. The only other thing that I'll say is in all of my presentation, although this one is a little bit easier, there's no religious rulings. I do not claim to be an expert in Islam. I mean, I know my basics, and to me, my basics may not be your basics, but inshallah, I don't have any, I'm just giving you guys the law and general knowledge about school law as it relates to Islamic education schools, Islamic private schools. So, if there are any questions about that, feel free to let me know. Okay, so my plan is hopefully we'll do like 30 to 40 minutes, and then I'll save 20 minutes for Q&A. And feel free to stop me in the middle. I actually enjoy having discussions with you guys because you guys are actually on the practical side of things and really see what is going on with COVID and operating a private school. So Inshallah, let's begin. If I can move forward, let's see. There we go. Okay. So the thing that's, I think, on everybody's mind right now is kind of getting through this year, but really planning for next year. And kind of knowing the backdrop of what we need to do to kind of open up. So with Biden, President Biden taking over in office, and having a Congress that is a majority Democrat, it has really changed the game, so to speak, in terms of how governance will work over the next couple of years. And education is no different. Education will definitely be part of that change. In fact, you guys know that President Biden had very aggressive goals in terms before even coming into office. And now with the passage of the American Rescue Plan just days ago, not even a day ago, it's showing that the Democrats really are going to wield their power. And if there are compromises that the Republicans want that are unreasonable to them, they may not even give in to those. They're just going to use their power and wield it. And that's kind of the society that we find ourselves in. I think, that's kind of evident. But the major goals that they had was, one is just to reopen schools. So you guys might be in a hybrid learning environment, most likely a hybrid learning environment. If you guys are fully in person, I would really love to know. Feel free to drop that in the chat. Or you guys may be virtual and hybrid. But one of President Biden's major goals coming into office was reopening schools, finding a way to reopen schools. And that has been made evident by the categorization of education personnel as, I think, 1B in terms of getting vaccines. So they're really putting you right behind frontline workers and healthcare workers to make sure that you guys have the vaccine so you feel comfortable and safe going into school and having students back in school. So that is a really big priority. Some of the other priorities that he wants to do in public education is free community college. Democrats are notorious, well, not notorious, or infamous, I should say, for wanting to reduce debt and wanting to help the domestic population and not necessarily, the foreign population. So free community college is one goal, and then tuition-free public university. That is, it's not applicable to you guys, but it kind of shows the mentality that it has. And that is a very aggressive mentality. Even in the American Rescue Plan, I believe for students whose loans are due to be forgiven in 2021, or even I think 2022, they do not have to pay income tax on their loan forgiveness. That is, you guys, you can take that lightly, but that's a huge thing. Because if you think about loan forgiveness, if somebody has, let's say, by the end of their loan payment, they have about $50,000 worth of loan, and that gets forgiven, that's actually treated as income on your taxes for the next year. So let's say somebody makes $50,000, they get a $50,000 loan, forgiven. Their income for that next year is $100,000, and there's a sizable tax bill on that, which a lot of people don't realize. So it just goes to show, again, with the Democrat majority Congress and with the Democrat president, they're being very hawkish, very aggressive on these goals. And I think really this was in the American Rescue Plan, and I think this is kind of a sign of things to come. Like if Democrats continue to control, this is where it's going to be going. But I wouldn't say that this is going to be the new normal, because Republicans eventually will take over again. But it just kind of shows you the mentality. And knowing that Dr. Jill Biden, the first lady now, is a former teacher, she's a doctorate in education, I would probably say President Biden has a soft spot for teachers, and that is also kind of motivating some of his goals and increasing teacher pay and increasing teacher support. He's seen the kinds of issues that come up on pay for teachers, how little money they have. So he's kind of wanting to increase that. And as COVID has happened, really wants to close the digital divide. So, in rural areas, even in the urban areas where, internet connectivity is not a given. COVID has really shown us, that there are areas within our cities, and there are definitely areas, down south, especially in Illinois, when you get to Southern Illinois, that internet connection is just it's not a given. I live in the western suburbs of Chicago, in the Chicagoland area, and alhamdulillah, that's a given. In our house, we have 3 tablets. We have two laptops and 2 tablets running at any one time when the kids are in school. But alhamdulillah, that is something to actually be thankful for, and not necessarily a given. So he wants to do that too. So now that we're in, within the first 100 days of the administration, we already have our American Rescue Plan that has a sizable chunk of money to not only public schools, but 2.75 billion available to non-public schools as well. So if I were to give you a practical advice, go after that money. There's money to be had. It's tax-free. Let's work together to find out a way to get that money. I mean, it was passed in the legislation, and obviously everything's going to come through the federal government. And I think it may even be funneled down through the states. But, you guys as private school leaders, it is incumbent upon you to try to go after that money. I know that everybody is dealing with, low enrollment, shortages in staff. There's a lot of issues. You guys have to buy PPE and all of that stuff. There's a lot of issues to be had. So free money out there, obviously you should take it. Even the Education Secretary, Miguel Cardona, it was, there was a lot of guessing going on as to who the new education secretary would be, because President Biden is very labor friendly, and the Secretary of Education really drives policy forward for the Department of Education, as you saw with the Trump administration. They really increased school choice in private schools, which was all good for private schools, Islamic schools, but at the same time, they were really hurting public education. Miguel Cardona comes from the K-12 atmosphere. He was the head of education, I believe, in Connecticut. So he comes from a K-12 atmosphere. So he's going to really be focusing on public education initiatives. So for the next 4 years on that front, education policy, it may not be so friendly to private schools. And there's going to be a lot of reversal done as to, the school choice and all of that stuff that Betsy DeVos did under the Trump administration. And you guys may have already seen this, there have been new updates from the CDC regarding reopening schools. They're really trying to push that forward and trying to create a pathway, not only through vaccination, but giving schools the tools, not only the operational strategies, but guidance on reopening schools. So, and that's actually what we will talk about next. Okay, so the CDC guidance, that blue link is actually a link to the CDC webpage. So we can all obviously share this PowerPoint later. I'm sure you guys have probably already seen it, but if you haven't, feel free to message, or you can we can click, you can get a copy of that PowerPoint, and click on that link. But it's really chock full of stuff, really trying to emphasize the reopening of school in person. And that is a real, like I said, that's a major goal of the Biden administration. And really, when you're planning for the 2021-2022 school year, I think the status quo or the norm would be to be in person. And hybrid is going to be something like, if you have an outbreak of COVID or something like that, that's really where and virtual learning is kind of going to be on the back burner. So I'll give you an example. Even in Illinois, right now, Illinois had been, up until very recently, they've been requiring public school districts to provide a virtual platform so that they can meet the needs of students. Now, just recently, I think in this last week, IDPH, Illinois Department of Public Health, has come out with a new guidance saying virtual classrooms is not so much required anymore. We really want you to start going in hybrid or in person. So you can see kind of the trend is changing because vaccinations are happening. You know, we're getting closer to herd immunity. So they really want to start leaning that way. And public schools that are not doing that, they're really going to start pushing hard. Although this is guidance, it's not required. They're really going to start pushing hard, you know, on the school districts to go back in person. And the public is already doing that. Your community has already likely been doing that. They've been pushing you to go back in person a little bit here and there, right? At least somewhat. By next school year, by the 2021-2020 school year, I think it's going to be, that's going to be the status quo. Like hearing somebody not in person is going to be out of the ordinary. You know, like even when the pandemic started, a simple example, even when the pandemic started, I remember, you know, masjids open for Jummah was like, wasn't even a thing. And now, you know, you're a year in, now a masjid not open for Jummah is kind of the anomaly. And the norm is masjids open for Jummah, right? I mean, there's distancing, there's masks, there's everything, but it's open. And it's open in person. And that's exactly what the CDC guidance is talking about. So they had three major principles that they wanted to kind of convey so that people, you know, so that school districts feel comfortable. And mitigation strategies is number one. Indicators to assess community transition. So when you're talking about opening in person, they really want you to do those mitigation strategies. Even if everybody's vaccinated, they want you to take precaution and really have people feel safe, have parents feel safe sending their children, especially since they're not going to be vaccinated, have teachers feel safe coming into work. And those mitigation strategies will really help. But it's not just putting the mitigation strategies in place and kind of leaving it alone. It's putting the mitigation strategies in place and really monitoring how everything is going. And the second principle goes to that, is indicators to assess community transmission. So what they really want you to look at is the total positive numbers, new numbers of COVID within your community. That's that first bullet point, and then the positive tests within your community. So what they want you to focus on is this chart right here. So these are the two indicators, meaning number of new cases in the past 7 days, and then number of positive tests in the past 7 days. And they've kind of given a guideline, so to speak, of phased instruction based on the transmission rate. And that's that third principle. I'll go back to that screen, I promise. That's that third principle going at it. So it's really, you know, you want to take steps based on where you're at on that chart, like where you guys are at in terms of community transmission. That's where you want to go. So the CDC essentially, and the Biden administration in turn, is essentially saying, hey, listen, we want you to go back in person. We really feel like it's ripe to do so. You need to go back in person, not only for yourselves, for the economy, but the social well-being, the social and mental well-being of your students. But that doesn't mean you stay in person no matter what happens. Really look at the data, make sure you're monitoring the data, and then make decisions based on that. So it's going to be a constantly evolving thing that you're going to be going through on a weekly, probably on a daily basis. You know, if you have an outbreak, you got to make new decisions. And that, I think, to be quite frank, I think that's just what normal life is going to be like for the coming years. COVID, although we have the vaccine, it's going down, there's variants, and we don't know what those variants are going to introduce, right? So this mask wearing, I remember last March we were talking about, oh, we're just going to wear it for a couple weeks and we'll be fine. And now you're at a year, you're still wearing masks. And now anytime I touch a door handle, I'm always washing my hands. I've become like very, very paranoid about, even when I go into my office, I'm always using my elbow to press the elevator button. You know, it's interesting how, you know, behavioral changes have happened even amongst me. Like as soon as I walk in through the door, I immediately wash my hands after whenever I'm touching a highly touched surface. So I think this is going to be a part of normal life for some time to come. Sister Shubnam is asking, can we require that all teachers be vaccinated for the new school year? They're a great question, and I will, where am I on time? Oh Lord, okay. I will be getting to that very, very quickly. Okay, So mitigation strategies, you guys know this, you guys have already been doing it. 6 feet distance where possible, hand washing, cleaning and maintaining facilities. Testing is a big thing. They really want you, CDC has encouraged that people get tested. Like, there are the rapid response tests that people have. I know public school districts have been doing them like on a weekly basis almost. If that's something that you can do, for sure. The physical distancing, I think, is the biggest one. And a lot of our Muslim schools, I mean, even the school that my children go to, Hadi School in Schaumburg, it's obviously a little bit smaller. So physical distancing is not really something that can be done. I mean, normally in that pre-K classroom, there were probably like 10 to 15 kids, I think, at minimum. And they were definitely not physically distanced. Now I think there are about 6 kids, but they can actually be physically distanced. So maintaining that 6 feet, CDC has not gone away from that 6 feet threshold. Illinois has gone away from that 6 feet threshold. They've actually started to say, hey, 3 to 6 feet is okay, but CDC has kind of hung fast at that 6 feet. But really all of the things that you guys are already doing, those are the mitigation strategies that they want people taking. In terms of classroom, try to maintain 6 feet separation, walking paths, maybe even a teacher zone that has like, one of those big dividers so that the teacher is separated from the students so that there's not as much contact, hand sanitizing stations, all of that kind of good stuff. I'm already running low on time, so that's why I'm kind of speeding it up. But if you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat, and we can kind of talk about them. The one thing that I did want to mention before moving on is this. It is very, very interesting, at the low and moderate transmission that it's in-person instruction. That's kind of, that was kind of expected. At the substantial transmission, it's hybrid instruction. But what's really interesting about this chart is if you look at the high transmission, they are still recommending that elementary schools be hybrid during that. That a year ago would not have existed. That a year ago would have been, oh my God, why are you telling people to go back during a high transmission period? For middle school and high school, they're saying virtual. Now, what I think, then this is me opining, of course, but really what I think is that the social and emotional benefits of school for young children is outweighing now the risk of transmission. And that's why they're kind of saying, hey, you've got to go to hybrid. You got to keep these kids in school. It's just not going, the learning loss that's going on. I mean, I have a 4 and a 5-year-old. The learning loss that's going on and the behavioral changes, quite frankly, me and my wife are just waiting. We are literally just waiting for that time that, okay, we're going to send our kids back. I think really the CDC is kind of starting to see, listen, like, okay, COVID is bad, but the mental and emotional side effects of COVID, of not being in school, of not socializing. I mean, I know children now, who don't want to leave the house anymore. My child, I mean, my younger son, sometimes he just doesn't want to go out of the house. Really, we have to make it an effort to kind of reintroduce, hey, listen, got to go see people now. Like we went to a friend's gathering a few weeks ago, and they were both like attached to me like they were 2 years old. And it was such an eye-opening experience for me because it's real. It's real, and the effects are really real. So this is kind of your chart to kind of, when you open school, make sure you look at the data. And if the data matches with this is kind of where the CDC is going. Again, know that the CDC is not requiring anything. They don't have regulations in place. It's just guidance. So make sure you know that. But, each school will have to make a decision based on their community, based on their needs. But this is kind of a really good indicator as to where we're going. And I think it's a good model, to kind of use as a template for your school going forward. Okay. Now, wanted to talk a little bit about COVID. So next part, we've talked about the next school year, and now really dealing with COVID as you guys are in school now and going forward in the future. So really there's 2 main topics. One is how to deal with COVID now, as you guys are in school with your teachers, and then vaccination, which is the other big one. So I think I got about 15 minutes and I think I can wrap it up, but I will be a little bit quicker. So you guys have been dealing with this for the better part of 1 school year. So you guys kind of know, you guys may or may not have had some employee issues with people fearing coming back. during COVID. And that's really what this section is really meant for. So the Americans with Disabilities Act applies to any employer that has 15 or more employees. So generally speaking, for you guys, I would imagine that most of you guys fall into this realm. And really what it requires is reasonable accommodations for employees with disabilities in the workplace. So what we're talking about here is the people, the staff members that have some sort of condition that would make them hesitant to come to school, or that would really put them in danger of coming back to school. So we're not talking about people who, hey, listen, I just don't feel comfortable. Hey, listen, I have a parent at home and I don't want to do that. I don't want to risk getting my parent, or getting my family members sick. Although you can be, the law, I always say the law is a ceiling, is a floor, not a ceiling, right? You can always do the minimum required by the law. And if you really feel like, hey, listen, those parents, you have an older parent at home and you don't want to risk it, we understand. That's doing more than that's required by the law, and that's totally fine. But just remember, once you make that one exception for that one employee, just remember that floodgate is going to open, and it may open real wide. So remember who you're making an exception for, and who behind that person, how many people behind that person you'll have to make an exception for after that. So whenever you provide reasonable accommodations, it's only for people with disabilities in the workplace. Those other people that I just described, it's not necessarily applying to them. Of course, you can make exceptions for them, but just remember, there are going to be other employees that want that same accommodation or want that same exception. So really, what the Americans with Disabilities Act requires is an interactive process. The interactive process means whenever you're providing a reasonable accommodation, you have to engage in an interactive process with your employee. So that means analyzing the job, consulting with the employee, having a discussion with them, and identifying potential accommodations that are effective, that don't require an undue hardship, and then selecting and implementing an accommodation. So really the main thing is you have to provide a reasonable accommodation to an employee that has a disability, but it doesn't have to be an undue hardship. Undue hardship is really the key factor here. If an accommodation is an undue hardship, then you don't have to provide it. You don't have to give in to what the employee wants. So a very simple example is, okay, we have an employee that has a disability that doesn't want to necessarily be around other people, but you only have one entrance and exit to your school, right? And all the other ones are fire emergency exits that an alarm would go off. Let's just pretend, I know this is kind of a crazy hypothetical, but let's say that employee says, okay, well, no, I want a separate entrance that I can dedicate to myself. And the separate entrance would require you blowing through a wall and giving them a separate entrance. That obviously is an undue hardship. That wouldn't necessarily stand up. So you engage in the interactive process. That's the accommodation. That's the only accommodation they want. And you say, hey, listen, if nothing else works and that's the only accommodation you want, we cannot provide it. I'm sorry, that's going to cost like $25,000, $50,000. And, redoing the school is not something that we can do at this time. A more simple example, is, let's say somebody has asthma. And wearing a face mask over their face is too much. It really exasperates their asthma conditions. Now, could you engage in an interactive process with them and say, hey, listen, okay, we'll provide you, one of those face masks, not the face mask, the face shields, and like a separate teacher area in your classroom so you're cordoned off and it's safe for you? That's probably reasonable. That's probably a reasonable accommodation that you should engage in that interactive process, engage in a discussion with your employee and get to that reasonable accommodation. Okay. And so these are some of the reasonable accommodations that have happened during COVID. Like I said, additional PPE, for somebody who wants additional PPE because they have a condition, like they want to wear the mask, but they also want a face shield and a gown, probably something reasonable. It is a cost to you, of course, but a cost is never an undue hardship. It's got to be something that's really above and beyond. And PPE, although expensive, not terrible. Alternative entrance and exit to the extent possible. Like if there is a door there, sure. alternative assignments, use of sick leave. I'm sure you guys have already given some of that. Leaves of absences for people who not only already have COVID, but also, that not only already have COVID, but have parents, or children that are sick with COVID, things like that. Just remember, whenever you provide an accommodation, it's kind of like you've kind of set the standard, and if you have 20 employees, that one employee that got that standard, make sure that you're ready to follow that standard all the way down. If you start discriminating based on different people, then you open yourself up to liability. And one resource that I'll give you guys that's really good is this third bullet point right here. It's called askjan.org. It's actually a free website that gives you examples of accommodations. So you can put in certain situations. It's a very easy to use website. It's free. You can look up accommodations based on certain disabilities. So it's kind of like a resource center for the ADA. So something very useful for you guys, and just another resource. Of course, if there are any questions, if you want to talk something through to use each other, call me. Happy to help. All right, man, time goes fast. Okay, I got 8 minutes to go through vaccination, which I don't think I'll need 8 minutes. Okay, undue hardship. I think I mentioned that. This is the hardship analysis that we go through before, let's say something you feel is an undue hardship, talk to somebody. Never make that decision by yourself. There is a hardship analysis. There's a legal analysis that goes with the hardship. So call me or talk to somebody else before you make that decision. Never make that decision in a vacuum and by yourself. Make sure that you have like an objective third party, somebody that can kind of talk it through with you to make sure that you're kind of on the right path. And that's a lot of legal situations. When you talk it through, you really kind of come out to a solution that will be more feasible. Okay, but I won't go through that too much in depth. I'll just say what I would like to plaster across the screen on this is just say call Mohammed, and I'll give you my cell phone number at the end. Okay. All right. Okay. Vaccination, the stuff that you guys really want to talk about. Let me just take one sip and then chill up. Okay. I apologize if I'm going fast. If anybody has any questions, please do feel free to ask. Vaccination, the long and the short answer. I'll give you the very short answer, and then I'll give you the long legalese behind it. The short answer, can you require vaccinations? Generally speaking, you are allowed to require that employees get vaccinated. However, big however, is that practically the best solution? And I would say very much no. Although it can legally be done, should it be done? And again, I would say no. The reason for that is, number one, if you require a vaccination, you are going to have to make accommodations for people who have disabilities that can say, hey, listen, I have a disability, I don't want to take this vaccination, or a religious objection. The analysis to require a vaccination is not very black and white. It's gray. The EEOC, again, a blue link to the EEOC guidance. Section K within that link talks all about vaccinations. And even the EEOC says, hey, listen, you can likely make it a requirement, but you should really try to go with the education route first. From our experience, from my experience, most teachers that we've seen have not been hesitant to get a vaccination. They have really jumped at the chance to get a vaccination. If you guys have a different experience, I would love to hear it. But most of the teachers, even down south, where it's a little bit more conservative, especially in Illinois, they have been ready to take the vaccination and get on board, because they really see that as a means of going back in the classroom and doing something that they love. And I think if school districts are encouraging of that and really give a pathway for teachers and staff to get vaccinated, in our experience in the last couple of months, it's been happening like almost at 100% rate. If you have a different experience, I'd love to hear it. But the long analysis, the legal analysis, that's all outlined on this page, and it's not supposed to be understandable. So don't think that it wasn't meant to be like, oh, hey, you can read this and really kind of get the essence. If you want to read it and you understand it, hey, you should have been a lawyer. I'll send you some of my old law school books, but it wasn't really meant to be understandable. But really, the long and short of it, I can go through the legal analysis. I understand that I only have 4 minutes, but I really don't want to bore you with it. But really, the practical solution is really what I want to provide you. And what I really want to say that is what I would do, what I would counsel my clients to do is really go after the education piece and encourage teachers and staff to get the vaccine. And if they are hesitant, I would really try to have meetings, have discussions as to why they're hesitant, what exactly about it is making them hesitant, and see if you can overcome some of those fears. If after that you really don't have it and you want to make it mandatory, you may do so, but you can make it mandatory. But if they have a disability that prevents them from getting the vaccine, then the game goes back to the ADA. You have to provide them with a reasonable accommodation. So let's just kind of go through an example. You have a teacher that tells you, hey, listen, I'm just making this up out of thin air. I have diabetes, and people with diabetes cannot get the vaccine because it will, cause a stroke or a heart attack or something, God forbid, stuff. But so, let's just say that that's the situation. For that person, you have to find a reasonable accommodation for them. And that may be extra PPE, their own teacher space, whatever accommodations they need, that may be an accommodation. You can't just say, hey, listen, you have a disability, you didn't get the vaccine, we required it, you're out. That's not how it's going to work. That's going to lead to a disability lawsuit right on your face. You have to find them a reasonable accommodation. If the reasonable accommodation is reasonable, doesn't lead to an undue hardship, then you got to implement that reasonable accommodation. If the accommodation will lead to undue hardship, then you have the ability to exclude them. But then know again that just because the ADA doesn't apply doesn't mean that there isn't some other law that applies. And for those of you living in progressive states, like Illinois and California, there may be laws or regulations coming out that, denying somebody employment because they don't want to get the vaccine is unlawful. It's not out there yet, but it's very possible. So just know all of that. I think really, I would love to hear during the Q&A in the 2 minutes, I'd love to hear if somebody has been hesitant about the vaccine, and we can definitely talk about it more. But really, I think you don't even really want to go down that path. And if you are going down that path, call me first or talk to somebody first. But really, I think the education and the encouraging is really the big thing. Sister Shubnam asked, I hope I answered your first question. Now on to your second. Can a teacher refuse to be vaccinated because she wants to have a baby in the future? Again, it's really going after the concerns and wanting to know, okay, what makes you think that you won't get a baby in the future because you've had the vaccine? I mean, there's a lot of fear and angst out there that vaccines cause. Polio vaccine causes autism. That's been something that we've been dealing with for years and years and years. There is a lot of misinformation out there, and really, I think the job of the administration is not to necessarily come down with an iron fist, but really come with an Islamic education-friendly type hand to say, hey, listen, what is your true issue with this, and let's try to resolve it together. If there is a concern that let's say Johnson & Johnson's vaccine, prevents childbirth. Johnson & Johnson's vaccine is only one shot, and I think it's a little bit less effective. I think it's in the 70 to 80% range, but the Moderna and the AstraZeneca are in the 95+% range, right? So, if it's an issue of brand, then maybe we can get past it. I would really try to go down that path of helping her understand and what information she has, that makes her think that it is unsafe for her. And truly, if she then can't be convinced, having a child or being pregnant is generally a disability that you have to accommodate, but you have to actually be pregnant. Like if a pregnant woman didn't want to get the vaccine, then we have another conversation. There's actually a federal law on that, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. And there are a whole lot of state laws on that too. So whenever you have a pregnant person not wanting to get the vaccine, not only will the ADA apply, Pregnancy Discrimination Act will come on top of that. There's a whole host of, in the last probably five years, you know, they've really targeted pregnancy discrimination, and whether that be during pregnancy or after, they've really kind of made that a focus to make sure that you know, employers are not discriminating and providing even rooms for nursing and all of that stuff. So again, I would probably, if this employee is not pregnant and saying, hey, listen, you know, the vaccine causes some sort of illness in children, or I won't be able to have children in the future, again, I would probably ask her, you know, the reasoning. And I'd really want to know the situation in terms of your other employees, just to show them, like, you know, how many other employees have been vaccinated, or is there anybody else showing hesitancy? And then kind of continuing down the line of education. And really, if education doesn't work and she doesn't have a disability, then you can make it a requirement for your staff. If you make it a requirement for your staff, you can make it a requirement for your staff, and then you can exclude that employee if it really comes down to it. But again, I would really force the education. And if it's, you know, let's say it's July and she still hasn't been vaccinated, then you can have a real conversation like, listen, we're really requiring this. And you let us know if you can meet this requirement or not. And if they are pregnant at the time, then that's a different conversation. But if she is just fearful because she won't be able to get pregnant in the future, you can make it a requirement and potentially exclude her. But again, really have to sit down and have conversations. I always say hire fast, fire slow. And if you're going to exclude somebody from the workplace because they're not willing to do something that's required, make sure you have all of the information that you need, and make sure that you've documented everything. Make sure you have documentation to know, okay, it's very clear from the documents, from the email chain, from whatever, that we tried everything. And she's just not, this teacher is not doing it. And right now, we really need this position. Like, you know, if there's can she work virtually? You know, even if that can happen, you know, all of those things kind of are at play. But if nothing is available, like there can't be another assignment to her, or, you know, you can't give her extra PPE that would make her feel comfortable. Like you've offered extra PPE and she doesn't want to get the vaccine, you know, that's a decision you can make too. And if she doesn't want to do it, then you can exclude her. You can make it a requirement. You can say, hey, listen, everybody's getting the vaccine. If you don't have the vaccine, you're out. But make sure you have a conversation with people, with somebody before you go down that road, especially in California where, you know, it's very progressive and there are a lot of protections for employees. Okay. All right. So I'm at 11:44. I already started the Q&A. I transitioned well, I think. We have about 15 minutes, inshallah. Please let me know if there are any other questions. You can drop them in the chat. You can unmute yourself. Please feel free to let me know. Sister Susan has a question. What if a teacher has multiple sclerosis and doesn't want to risk the vaccine because it may increase inflammation and flare the disease? That's a good one. So because they have a disability that may be impacted by the vaccine, now we need to go through that, the ADA analysis, essentially. So let's say you made it a requirement, or let's say it's not even a requirement, but somebody says, you know, hey, listen, I can't take the vaccine because I have this multiple sclerosis, and I think that it's going to flare up. Under the ADA, in an interactive process, you are allowed to get documentation to substantiate claims. So, you know, the first question in my analysis would be, okay, well, where are you getting this information? Did your doctor say that? Can your doctor provide a note to that effect? You know, what is the basis for your information and for your decision. Now, let's say the doctor comes back with a note and, you know, they've done some trials and they've done some tests, and yes, multiple sclerosis does qualify, or it does cause inflammation, or the vaccine causes inflammation of multiple sclerosis. Then you have to go through that ADA analysis that we talked about. That ADA analysis being, have an interactive process, sit down with the employee and say, okay, well, what can we do so that you feel safe at work, even if you're not getting the vaccine? We've decided that, okay, the vaccine is unsafe for you. What can we do so that you know, you can come back safely to work, so that we can have you as our employee and you feel safe in the work environment? And maybe that's additional PPE, going back to, oh, sorry. Whoops. Where are we going? Stop that. There, okay. Maybe that's additional PPE. Maybe that's additional space in the classroom. Maybe that's like a teacher cordoned off, you know, like a really big plexiglass thing in front of, right by her desk, so that students can't come right up to her in person, but they can come behind the plexiglass desk, you know. Can you come to a solution where the employee feels safe and you feel like you're getting the work out of the employee? Likely, I think you would be able to the extent that you feel that not being vaccinated is going to cause a problem in the workplace, meaning it's going to really create a direct threat to everybody around them, and there's no reasonable accommodation, then you can exclude the employee. But what I just described in 2 sentences is a huge process. They really have to be a direct threat. Now, you know, even like, for example, if I were to think about Hadi School, where my children go, if one employee couldn't have it, and let's say she's like, you know, a 3rd, 4th grade teacher, that students, they don't have to like be interacting with students, you know, very in person, like very closely. I could see a situation in which that employee could get a reasonable accommodation. But for a pre-K teacher, potentially, that would be tough. That would be a tough ask for them to be cordoned off in a space, you know. But again, reasonable accommodation doesn't mean that they have to stay as a teacher. Maybe they become an aide, or maybe they take another staff position at the school and not necessarily a teacher position, right? There's a laundry list of things that you can go through. Like, you got to be creative in this process. Now, let's say it's a pre-K teacher and there's just nothing that we can do. We don't have any other staff. We can't afford to keep this teacher on and then pay another new teacher. Can you exclude? Yes, but make sure that you went through that analysis to say, you know, it would create a direct threat, that direct threat analysis, and you didn't find a reasonable accommodation, and any reasonable accommodation was just an undue hardship. Like, we just could not find a solution that we could make this work. At that point, then, after making sure to document everything, probably after involving legal counsel for a little bit, then you could probably exclude that teacher and hire another teacher. What I would probably do is maybe furlough, if you can, like a leave of absence unpaid, and hire a substitute for a temporary period if possible. That would be my solution. But really, if you have to exclude, then at that point you can exclude. But remember, I really, there's a lot of hills to climb. There's a lot of steps to climb before you get to that. Sister Susan, did I answer your question?
Yes, but then I had
Okay.
another question that has come up. If you check the
Yes, no,
chat.
absolutely. I'm getting to that right now. But
All right, I'm trying to eat my cake and have it both ways here.
No, that's fine. I'm rambling, and I just want to make sure that, you know, the firing decision, it seems like something that's very simple, but whenever you talk to a lawyer, there's like 10 other things that go behind that before you actually fire. So that's, I always just want to make that clear to people, because I know you guys operate under time constraints. You guys just don't have time to kind of be thinking about all of these different things, but that's what you pay me for. So call me. I'll think about those things for you, and then we'll figure it out together. Okay. Sister Susan also says, can a board write a policy requiring the vaccine but also put a clause citing mitigating circumstances. Is there a better phrasing for the clause? Mitigating circumstances meaning what?
Unless there is like a reasonable reason for denying it, where maybe you can just like leave a loophole that it is required unless there are some special circumstances that preclude that person getting the vaccine.
Yeah. So you can probably send a directive out. I probably wouldn't necessarily, I don't necessarily think that I would put it in board policy, but having a directive to require vaccinations, again, it's a little bit gray, but it is in the employer's favor at this point. You could do that, but yes, I would definitely make sure that it has a caveat of saying we are requiring the vaccines unless, unless there are circumstances in which you would be exempt from getting the vaccine, unless there are extenuating circumstances which would risk the health of the employee by getting the vaccine, something like that.
Thank you.
Something
I
like
appreciate. Yeah, the legalese is what we need some help with if we're going to
Yeah,
draft
absolutely.
something, but have a potential, exemption. That's how it should be phrased.
Right.
Thank
And
you.
really kind of just taking a step back even from that, before even making the directive to require it, I would probably have a directive or a communication to the employees to say, hey, listen, you guys are in 1B, we have the vaccination, and getting some resources lined up so that teachers can take the vaccination. That is what I would start with. And you probably already have started with that. I'm making some assumptions that you haven't, but I would start with that. And after a couple months, after a reasonable amount of time, I wouldn't say a couple months, but a reasonable amount of time, given a month or two, to really, give the employees the summer to get vaccinated, and then they're still refusing, then I would probably make that directive if you guys really, really wanted to. But again, I mean, in my experience, it's been one out of the entire staff, and that person has some sort of disability or some sort of misinformation that makes them think that the vaccine is unsafe. And yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to discredit those people that have some fears, honestly. I'm not a first adopter myself. Whenever technology comes out, I'm always 3 or 4 phone models behind myself. So when the iPhone 10 came out, I'm still sitting at an iPhone 7 or 8. So I feel the same way about the vaccine. Luckily, I'm just not at the top of the list anyway. Legal workers, I think, are 1C. So I still have a little bit of time. And I've seen, my father is actually a physician. So he's already gotten the vaccine. I've had my in-laws get the vaccine. They had a little bit of side effects after the second shot, but alhamdulillah, they've all been doing well. And actually my mother-in-law has a condition, so we haven't been able to see her for a year. So alhamdulillah, that has been going well. So anything that I've seen personally, it's just making me more and more convinced that the vaccine is safe. But 10 years down the line, we never know what's going to happen. But as of right now, it seems like it's something that's safe and effective. I hope I answered your question. I think I did.
Yes, thank you. If anybody else
Yeah.
has any questions, please put them in the chat box or feel free to unmute yourselves.
Or even if you want to hear, I know, and I apologize, I know I glossed over quite a few things, especially the vaccination part. I really didn't want to bore you guys with the legalese. I mean, I could talk about that for an hour if I really wanted to, but you guys would probably be falling asleep in your chairs. So, but if you guys want me to go through that in a little bit more depth, we have about 6 minutes. I'm happy to do that. We can call it quits early. I know it's Saturday and you guys have families to get to and fun stuff to do. I mean, in Illinois, it's kind of nice outside. It's about 60 degrees. So going outside would probably be a good thing as well. But please do let me know if I glossed over anything. If you have any other questions, please reach out. That is my work email. You can always get me by texting or even calling. That's my cell phone number. Oh, I put it in the waiting room. Sorry. Hold on one second. This is my cell phone number. Feel free to call anytime. I mean, like I said, for you guys, this is really boring and it's an impediment to operating a successful school. To me, it's kind of the fun stuff about operating a school. So, you'll always get an enthused Mohammed talking to you about this kind of stuff. So feel free to call anytime, even if it's just something to talk through. If you guys need help with a bigger project, then we can talk about fees and stuff. But I'm happy to discuss, anything if you guys want. I really like this stuff, and really it's more of an obligation that I feel upon myself, being an attorney and a Muslim, to help Muslim schools, especially since I do education law. So please feel free to contact and reach out if you have anything.
Thank you so much. I have learned a lot from this, and I really appreciate that you've given me the shortcut, because I've not been really keeping up with the details on some of these things that you brought up, but it's given me that some insight and certainly a lot to think about. So I thank you so much for your time and the volunteer work that you do. I hope, inshallah, we'll be finding you available in the future if we do have any other questions. Last call for any other questions from anyone from our viewers? Gone. Then we will be making a recording of this, so it's going to be posted onto YouTube after we do a little bit of editing. And inshallah, when it is posted on the CISNA office YouTube channel, we hope that you will share it with your other administrators and board members. Any other questions? All right, well then, thank you so very much. Really appreciate it. Have a wonderful day, everybody. It is Saturday. Get out there and play. Take care.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.